What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Walkout Podcast.
We talk about fights, news, and more. And today we're going to be covering the UFC 325 event and main card coming up this weekend in Sydney, Australia. Of course, featuring the main event of Volkanovski defending his title, Alex the Great Volkanovski, defending his title versus Diego Lopes in uh in a the sequel from their first fight last year in May. And we're not going to be starting there. We're going to be starting with the first fight on the main card, which of course, since it's in Australia, is an all Australian uh, fight, a lightweight bout between Quillan Salkilld and Jamie Mullarkey, which are two pretty young prospects, Australian prospects here, that are going to be going up against each other. And both of these guys have some good striking and knockout power. But regarding this bout specifically, I'm going to be favoring Quillan Salkilld since I think that he has more power. That just he's the overall better fighter here. I don't really see this as a I think the reason why they put this on the main card is because they need to have an all Australian fight. They wanna feature the real star prospect here, Quillan Salkilld, in the lightweight division. But I don't think they should almost even be a main card fight. Um, do you agree with that, or do you
Yeah, yeah.
think that this should be a main card fight? Yeah.
No, never. As you said, the reason why they have it on here is because they're both Australian and pretty decent fighters. But this is the definition of a prelim fight. Maybe you can have it as the top of the prelims. But to have it on the main card, I don't agree with. But I don't want to rant on about that. But I do actually agree totally with you that it shouldn't be there. But now it is, and we have to do the most of it. And if I gonna try and generate some hype for this, it is that, like you said, Salkill, he's
Yeah.
undefeated in the UFC and he's one of the better prospects right now, even though he's very unproven. He hasn't fought anyone that good, but he did knock out Hakprast, sorry for the pronunciation, in October of last year in round one, and he is a pretty decent prospect himself. So to get a round one finish is very good. And Salkid has looked very slick, and I am impressed so far. Maybe it's good that they take it quite slow because I think that Mullarkey isn't that big of a step up. It's almost a step down in competition. But as you rightly said, it's obviously because he's Australian that is there. But Mullarkey hasn't been active. When I look for his resume, there are a lot of losses that I'm not impressed with at all. He's a decent, pretty well-rounded fighter. Obviously, a bit better in the wrestling, but all right in the striking as well. But I don't think that he's gonna have much to do in this fight other than losing. Basically, I do agree with you that Salkild is the supreme striker and fighter, of course. And now that he gets a spot on the main card, I really think that he will and should use it to get a spectacular finish and maybe do a call out, maybe of someone ranked in the lightweight division, one of the lower ranked guys, possibly. So hopefully it can at least generate some hype for this very interesting prospect. In terms of prediction, I'm gonna go with a Salkill, actually round one KO or TKO. That might be a bit bold, but that's how much I actually think there is, in terms of the levels in between them. What's your prediction?
I mean, I think you covered it pretty well there in your, breakdown of how you think that this fight is gonna go, and I would be inclined to agree. I think that I'm gonna have to go with a second round TKO for Quill and Solkill, just because, I don't know. I can see some sort of, they're both Australians. It's in Sydney. Maybe you don't want to go out in the first round of the main card, knocking out your fellow countryman, in front of the audience when you're both, sort of prospects.
All right,
Maybe
yeah.
they're gonna show a bit of respect for each other. I don't know if that's a thing. I don't really know enough really about this Quillan Salkid to know what kind of personality he is. If he's a a killer, then maybe not. He might not want to do that, but I could see there be some sort of a first round of maybe they're feeding each other out. sort of. I don't think that Salkilld is gonna feel threatened by this Mullarkey guy. I do think that he has the possibility, though, absolutely to knock him out in round one. And I think that if he wants to, if he goes out there from the second of the first round, he does do that. He gets that done, but I don't know. I can just see it, sort of being a bit more cautious in the first round and then going for it in the second. So I'm gonna predict a second round TKO, but I think it very well could be in the first round. I wouldn't be surprised, and that is his game for the last few fights. So it's in line with what he's done before.
Yeah,
So it's a good pick. But yeah, are we done on that fight? Maybe we should move on to the next bout here,
yeah, I reckon so.
which
Because
is
next up we
yeah.
do have another Australian fighter, Tuivasa, taking on Teixeira. This one I'm a bit surprised by. I mean, I always like to look at the odds because that's professional analysis that determine how much of a favorite someone should be, obviously, and whether you're not betting on fights, it's a good indicator to see. And what I'm trying to get to here is that Salkilld is, like we agree with, a huge favorite in the first fight, and here Teixeira is a very very big favorite, actually bigger than Volk in the main event, and I don't really agree with that. I know that he is a prospect, sorry, coming up in the division, but what I also notice is that he lost last summer against Derek Lewis. And as we covered in our previous video in the breakdown of 324, is that Derek Lewis is a shadow of himself and he's really, really slow. And even though he has some power, to lose against him when you're supposed to be an up and coming prospect, if it had been like a couple years ago, I could excuse it a bit more. But for me, that's a big red flag. And I actually reckon that we can see some sort of upset. Tuivasa has obviously been very inactive recently. He hasn't fought in 1.5 years, and that was a loss. And the elephant in the room here is, of course, that he has 5 straight losses. However, before that, he did knock out Derek Lewis, who, of course, Teixeira lost to last time out. And the losses since his win against Lewis is Cyril Gahn, the number one contender, Pavlovich, one of the best heavyweights in the last years, Volkov, a very underrated heavyweight and top tier, in my opinion, Rosenstruik, who I actually think is kind of underrated too, but then it's Marcin Tybura, who is not that good in my opinion. So of course a very bad losing streak. But Taito Iwasa does seem to step up on home soil. So I'm actually gonna go with a huge upset here, and I reckon that Taito Iwasa will knock out Thales Teixeira come Saturday. And I'm gonna say that it's gonna be in the third round. Um, a lot of yapping from me there, but what's your analysis and prediction on the fight?
No, I agree with you in your analysis of that fight, and I think that it's quite simple, really. It's as you pointed out when you compare the records. It's quite obvious that Taito sure, he's had those 5 losses, and you can't really sort of look away from that. It's 5 losses in a row, regardless of who it's against. It's always bad, but if it at least gives some context to look at who those fighters were, and it's the highest, it's as high of a level of competition you can get in the heavyweight division, and I think that really speaks more for him than against him, actually, when you're going up against a guy like Teixeira, who, as you rightly pointed out, lost by knockout versus this version of Derek Lewis, the same version of Derek Lewis that we just saw last week get, quite badly handled by um,
Cortes
Waldo
Acosta,
Cortes
right?
Acosta.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
What's your prediction then?
it's
What do you reckon?
yeah, no, I agree with what you said, and I think that Taito picks this one. I'm not really sure the exact method here. I think that, I mean, it's the heavyweight division. It's not that uncommon to see, a knockout, but at the same time, it's hard to say. Does he have that power anymore? Does Teixeira have the chin to pick up? I mean, Teixeira did get knocked out by Lewis, so I think I'm actually gonna go with a knockout. I'm gonna go with let's say a second round TKO. again a second round here, but a second round TKO for Tuivasa. It's my pick in this fight.
Right. Both of us going for the upset there. And then we move on to a
Yeah,
much more even fight, at least on forehand here. It's Rafael Fiziev taking on Mauricio Ruffy. And this one is really interesting, and it might be the hardest fight to call on the card, even though I personally have to say that I do favor Ruffy here. I think his resume isn't the greatest, and obviously he lost against Saint-Denis. But Saint-Denis is very good, and I know you have some opinions on that fight, and I'm inclined to agree that maybe you shouldn't look into that loss too much. Um, but I do everything I've seen from Ruffy, he's a very, very good striking. I'm a big fan of it. And Fiziev shouldn't be underrated either, but he's a bit more of a plodder. He's very short for the division. Ruffy's going to have a huge reach advantage here. And he's like decent at Muay Thai, he really is, but there's nothing like wow about him. And I actually do think that to beat someone like Ruffy, or for me to pick against him at least, you're gonna have to have some kind of X factor. And like Fiziev, being that he can take damage and can scrap, I don't think it's enough. Um, but obviously, Ruffy did lose against Santini, and both of us picked him to win that fight. How much do you actually weigh that in here? Do you think it matters at all, or is it still enough for Ruffy to win against Fiziev?
I think firstly I think that the fight of of Ruffy and Saint-Denis, when Saint-Denis obviously submitted Mauricio Ruffy in September of last year, I think that that fight, a lot of people might be overestimating just how much of an impact it might have on Ruffy and his future career and what they draw from that fight. Because firstly, I think that Saint-Denis has since that fight has had a really good run, and I think that the version of Saint-Denis that we're seeing right now, and well, that comes in our prediction for the next fight on this card. But I think that that version of Saint-Denis is a really an upgraded version or a full potential version really of what he is
Yeah,
right now. And so I think that people are looking at that Ruffy versus Saint-Denis fight and they're seeing the old Saint-Denis, um, with his old fight style. He's got a new. You can go more into detail on that maybe later, but he's got a new gym right now, new training methods. He's a really serious guy on a mission right now. That's how he looks at least. And I think that Ruffy was going into that fight and he wasn't prepared to fight that version of Benoit Saint-Denis. And it was a completely different type of opponent from the previous opponents that Ruffy has had before. Reminder, of course, that Ruffy's previous performance versus Bobby Green when he knocked him out with a beautiful wheel kick that came against, well, as I said, Bobby Green, but that's a completely different fighter than Saint-Denis, and he might have went into the Saint-Denis fight and he might have thought that he would have a similar type of basically older finished opponent
yeah.
in Saint-Denis, but that wasn't what he got. So I think that Ruffy certainly isn't out of the game just because he lost versus Benoit there. So yeah, I'm going with Ruffy on this fight, and I think that the reasons for that are firstly the reach advantage. I think is quite significant, which plays into this fight even more so because it's a striking matchup mainly, and Ruffy's his technical, his karate style. I think it really benefits from that extra reach advantage, and I think that I think that he's a more technical just striker than Fiziev, which of course after the Saint-Denis fight, some people might want to dispute that by saying, oh, he looked so, he looked like he didn't even know where to keep his feet in that fight. Well, I said that was a real upset and a real surprise for probably Ruffy himself even in that fight. He wasn't ready for it. So this Fiziev fight, he will be going into this a lot more prepared, I believe. And if he doesn't, well, then I won't pick him ever again, probably, if he, against this type of committed opponent. But
Yeah.
I think he will go into this fight. He will be prepared for it, and he would get the win. I'm not really sure the exact method. I don't think it's gonna be a knockout because I do rate Rafael Fiziev's chin here. I think that it will be a big moment for a big opportunity for learning for Mauricio Ruffy how to really control the fight maybe a bit more and getting the points needed for winning the rounds here. So I'm gonna predict a unanimous decision for Mauricio Ruffy here. It's gonna be a tough fight, but I think that the reach advantage is just gonna be too big to. It's gonna be too big a factor to ignore here. Do you agree with that analysis, or do you see another outcome here?
No, I definitely don't, and I don't think I have too much to add. The reach, like you said, very significant here, and I don't see anything that Fiziev has that really can punish Ruffy that much. So, and I also count on the fact, by the way, rightly as you said, that Ruffy will have improved, and sometimes a loss is the best thing that can happen to a fighter for them to come back stronger. And going with that, I'm also predicting Ruffy. I'm a bit scarred from predicting too many finishes on the last card, so I'm gonna agree with you. Even though I think it might be a finish, I'm gonna go with a point win. And like you said, I reckon it's gonna be unanimous. Maybe has Fiziev hurt at some point, but I reckon that Fiziev is good at staying in a fight often. So I agree with that with you, sir. That I think it's gonna be a points win for Mauricio Ruffy. And then staying in the lightweight division, but moving up perhaps a step, we have Dan Hooker taking on Benoit Saint-Denis. This is an interesting one. Again, going back to the odds just to get a rough idea of this fight. Saint-Denis is a big favorite here. And I can't say that I totally agree with it, even though his run of form is very good. I've seen holes previously in Benoit's game, and then Hooker is a real veteran of this division, but not a veteran in terms of I think he's finished. I think he still has something left to give. And I can't look past a dangerous guy like that. And he's a bit crazy, right? When you look at interviews and stuff with Dan Hooker, he's like, I just love a scrap. And sometimes you don't want to
Yeah,
stay in the pocket with that kind of guy because he's a bit crazy. And he doesn't think of the consequences of just standing there and, taking one to give one. Um, with that said, I do think you have to favor Santini. I can see where he's a favorite, but I don't get why he's such a big favorite. I don't want to underestimate Dan Hooker. So for me, this is quite a tough fight to pick, actually. Dan Hooker obviously making quite a quick turnaround after his fight in, I believe, was it November against Arman Sarukian, where he got choked out. So nice to see him back this quickly, since he was quite inactive before that. And Benoit, sorry, has obviously been on a
yeah.
very good streak of form and has been fighting a lot, very active. And I think that can speak in his favor here. And as you mentioned with the gyms there, of course, Benoit Saint-Denis has moved to, I believe it's Imavov's gym. And I saw some interviews with the
Yeah.
coaches, and they seem like very serious guys. So if that's a good fit, which it has been so far, I mean, it's looked like it is. Maybe, just maybe, that's enough for Benoit to take this one. I'm still a bit torn. What's your thought about this fight?
I mean, I think it's actually a really difficult fight to call. I agree with you. I don't think that the odds should be, as disparate as they are. I think that it should be pretty even actually. But I do really rate Benoit Saint-Denis here. His run of form as of recently, three finishes on the bounce and against, pretty at least decent opposition. So I don't know. I think that it's difficult to call this one because you don't really want to go and uh, and pick the guy who's on a loss in Dan Hooker. But I agree with your sentiment, and Dan Hooker he just has that crazy spark, and we know how good his boxing is, his striking is.
Yeah.
So if I were to pick these two guys and put them in a pure striking matchup against each other, and let's make it both their prime versions, then I'm picking Dan Hooker every day. But the reason I think I'm still gonna go with Saint-Denis here, and the reason for that is really just the form, the gym, the moment that both of they are in. I mean, Saint-Denis beat Mauricio Ruffy before, and even though I covered how that fight might be, seen in a different light, that still is a very striking, heavy opponent who essentially blitzed down. I think that he can do the same versus Dan Hooker, even though Dan Hooker is of course a more experienced striker, and he might be ready for that. But I think that the fight versus Arman Sarukian, who all of course has a completely different level of fighter, I think Dan Hooker he isn't really he isn't finished, but he isn't either on he isn't really
He's not in his
sharp enough,
prime,
I
right?
think. Yeah, he's not in his prime yet. He isn't sharp enough really for the absolute highest level of fight that we have here. And I think that Saint-Denis he isn't really either. But why I'm giving him the edge here is because he just looks like right now in this run of form that he's in, he just looks like he's a man on a mission, and I'm probably even actually backing him to get a finish here versus Dan Hooker. If this, I would be surprised either way if this fight doesn't go to a finish, just because the way that both of these guys are fighting currently. I think that Saint-Denis is gonna try to grapple a bit, but it's gonna be he's gonna use that maybe more as a threat than as a constant, way to win. I think that they're both gonna be scrapping, but I do see Saint-Denis closing this out, and I'm gonna go with let's say I think decently late fourth round submission. I think he's gonna get Hooker tired in there. He's gonna out cardio him with his new training, and
Yeah.
then it's gonna get him down. I don't think that's he's I wouldn't rate him enough, even though of course he did knock out Darius. Darius he's a completely different level of finished,
Yeah, yeah.
compared to Dan Hooker, and he was never the same level of striker either. So I would definitely not back him to knock out Dan Hooker here. I don't think that. I'm not gonna say that it's not possible. I wouldn't say though that I would ever back him to do that. So I'm gonna predict him getting a submission here versus Dan Hooker in the fourth round, and that is my prediction for this fight. Do you back Hooker in this one?
Yeah,
Instead?
I actually do. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna regret it. And looking at the odds, obviously it's stupid, but there's something in me that thinks like the going 5 rounds as well. Then Hooker is experienced. He's mixed it with a lot of the best guys, and he has showed up well. Maybe if he loses his head and he doesn't show the best fight at Q at times, and like you said, do reckon that the prediction of a submission for Benoit can be really solid in that case. But yeah, I don't know. It's not completely rational, but there's something in me that reckons that Dan Hooker can get this done on. I was gonna say home soil. He's from New Zealand, so but it's pretty close. He's gonna
Yeah,
have a
it,
lot of the
it
crowd behind him at least. Um, might be a stupid pick, but I'm actually gonna back Dan Hooker here uh, to get a TKO. I reckon in round, let's say round 4 TKO. Uh, if I were to bet,
yeah,
maybe I
but
would bet on
we're both
Benoit, but yeah,
yeah, but we're both sort of thinking in the same way that it's gonna be a fourth round finish either
yeah.
way, regardless of who wins, regardless if it's Saint-Denis versus via a submission or it's Hooker via a knockout, and I could see it being pretty even before then, it go back and forth, pretty scrappy, maybe even in some moments,
It should be a
controlling
good
some of.
fight, right? I was surprised if
Yeah,
either
I think
guy
so.
isn't beat up in the 4th round, however it goes. If someone wins this while being like untouched or unmarked, it's a real statement. But I do suspect we'll get the scrap here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're gonna get a good scrap.
All right. And then finally, speaking of scraps, last time out was a real scrap between Alexander Volkanovski, like you said to give him his full name, Alexander the Great Volkanovski, of course. In my opinion, the featherweight goat, but that's a completely other discussion. Um, taking on Diego Lopes. Diego Lopes obviously taking a very impressive win against Gin Silva in the autumn, and then coming back for the rematch, another shot at gold. Do you reckon he has it in him to get it done this time, or is it time for Volk to defend once again? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, I have to back Alexander Volkanovski here, the GOAT, the Great, as his nickname is. But I agree with you. He's probably the GOAT of the featherweight division. And I mean, Diego Lopes, I do rate Diego Lopes as well. I really do think that he is probably the next best guy in the division.
Yeah,
Maybe, at least we'll see, in the future with Murphy and Evlo if they ever fight it out. But from what we know right now, he is probably the second best guy in the division. But is second best really good enough to beat Alexander Volkanovski here? I don't think so. And just based, I mean, there's not really that much that I think can change really from the first fight. I think that there's a levels different here in a lot of aspects. Volk may be older. He may be even older this time around than last time, but he still is, I think, sharper and just has a better game. He always comes in with such a good game plan, and he can change it up on the fly. Such a probably the highest fight IQ, maybe of all time in the UFC. We
Yeah,
don't know really exactly, but he's such a good, decision maker when he's in the octagon. A lot of people might be forgetting that, but not only is he, technically excellent, but he also, has such good decision making. He never really, messes up. He never, of course, he has been knocked out before, and though that did happen, but they weren't really because he committed, into large mistakes. Um, they were really more about, him being unsettled, maybe you could call it, in those positions. But don't think that he's gonna put himself in that position here, and we saw it last time out versus Diego Lopes that he never was put in that position, and Diego Lopes doesn't even have. I don't think that he has that power enough to knock out someone like Volk, and I think that that really is his only avenue here to win. Because as we saw last time, if you let Volk do his game plan and execute it against you, and if he is more skilled than you, then you're just not gonna be able to pick up a decision win against him. And I think that Volk is gonna steamroll here to another quite dominant decision win for me. But it's gonna be a good fight, just like the last one was. And Diego Lopes is gonna come out of this and you know probably, well, we'll see after the fight. Actually, we talk about that in the reaction if he does. I don't want to take out any sort of victory too early for Volkanovski here, but we're gonna see a great fight. That's just what I'm gonna say really about the main event here.
yeah,
So that's my prediction at least. Unanimous decision probably for Alexander Volkanovski.
yeah. I'm gonna have to agree because when I look at his record, Volkanovski, his only 3 losses in the UFC are to Ilia Topuria and 2 against Islam. One of them being very close, one being because he took it on short notice. And some would argue that the loss against Topuria is because he took that close to being flatline KO by Islam. So, and those guys, I mean, I don't want to jinx it either. And all respect to Diego Lopes, I think he's a very, very good fighter. But is he?
He's just at the same level. It's just,
No,
yeah,
he's not Ilia
of
Topuria.
course.
He's not Islam
Yeah.
Makhachev. So maybe I know his ground game is very good. I believe he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. But I mean, Brian Ortega is as well, and had Volkin. I believe was it the guillotine or a rear naked or something like that, where
Yeah.
Volk just held it for like 30 seconds and like refused to tap, and around then and Volk is still there. I mean, and he hasn't really looked like he's aged, has he? I mean, last time out against Lopez, that was like the time where you're supposed to be able to tell, okay, is he old or is he not? And he just didn't look old, and nothing I've seen from his training indicated that he's old. Maybe I've jinxed it now, but I can't really see him losing. Like you said, I do think that Lopez is the best guy in line. Some people would say Evloev or Murphy or someone like that. I rate Diego Lopez incredibly high. Fight IQ for someone his age is very good. His striking is very good. He's very has very fast hands and pretty good punch selection. His ground game is very, very decent, even though he's not too keen on using it. So all the credit to him. But I reckon that Volk's gonna defend here. The interesting thing, as always in rematches, as we saw maybe the latest time with Peter Yan beating Merab, and Yan was saying in the entire build-up, like rematcher, there's a reason why rematchers are a thing. And of course, just because Volk won the first time, it's not clear that he should win this time. And Lopez has said, building up to this fight, that he's worked on a lot of holes. But that's also something that you usually hear. I heard that from Sean O'Malley when he rematched Merab, and he looked even worse. So, and my point that I want to make, maybe I'm back to the like romantic thinking here, but I think that Volk, like you said, I totally agree. Volk's fight IQ is unmatched, and I reckon that when he has gone 5 rounds with a guy, he's seen something here, and I reckon that Volk can actually do something, even though he's not known for finishing fights always. he's very well rounded and does like a decision and just a scrap. But yeah, might be stupid, but I reckon that Volk can get a ground and pound finish actually, because I think that his fight IQ versus Diego Lopes um, is supreme, very supreme. And having the data from the last fight, I reckon that Volk can get a finish. I'm gonna say round 4, ground and pound, just to make a statement. That might be a
Yeah.
bad pick. I don't know, but
No, I mean, just, as I said, with Volk and his fight IQ and just his, just his decision making, I think he absolutely can if Diego Lopes, thinks he has an opening or something and maybe commits too much and
yeah,
Volk goes in and, gets him in. Especially, if Diego Lopes is losing the fight and, he's feeling like, wait, I've already had this fight before. I lost the first time around. I need to do something even more. And he just commits too much. Volk gets him on the ground, gets him with a counter, and then it cracks him, gets him on the ground, and then just, knows that he can control him, lands ground and pound, and gets him out of there. I can absolutely see that happening. Um, I think that it might be more dependent on Diego Lopes making a mistake, but I wouldn't put it past him, especially if he is losing and if it is in the later rounds and he's already had his fight before and he's gonna overcommit. So it's definitely possible. I can see it.
yeah. But like you said, that's a key factor. That if he's like 3 rounds down and like going into the fourth or
Yeah,
fifth, his corner is gonna tell him, okay, you need to go for broke. You're not getting it. If you lose 2 to Volk, you're never fighting him again, probably. Uh, you need to have
yeah,
your like nothing to lose basically. And Diego Lopes sometimes, most of the times, fights like that. Anyways, even though when he has something to lose, he fights
yeah,
like a total. I don't know what to say. Like he's wild, right, with his striking. Um,
yeah,
so, like you said, if his corner tells him to empty his clip, he's definitely going to do it. And I think that Volk is good enough to capitalize. My nightmare here is that Diego Lopes unloads his clip and Volk suffers, but we don't need to go into that. And I think that the chances of that are smaller than they are likely. So for me, I reckon that is. I like the chances of a Volk finish. So I'm gonna say, like I said, round 4 ground and pound finish for Volk. But I'm aware that I'm maybe looking through it with a bit of tinted glasses, so to speak. But all right, that's probably it then for UFC 325. That's every single fight on the main card covered. A pretty stacked card. It's going to be fun. There's at least some potential for a lot of finishes, I reckon, on
yeah,
foreign when you look at it now. Hopefully,
yeah. A lot of finishes and gonna be some really good fights in here. A lot of scraps as well. Scrappy fights that might lead to, as you said, a finish. So
yeah,
always a good card when that happens.
yeah, and Australians love a scrap, right? And the crowd is usually
Yeah,
up for it. I mean, the crowds in Australia are some of the best, in my opinion. So hopefully they can boost the fighters, especially their own, to have some
yeah,
really entertaining fights there. Because that's what we look for, especially
yeah.
on
I mean,
times where, yeah,
if as you said, as you predicted, Volk ground and pound. If Volk is on top of Diego Lopes in the fourth round, and then landing ground and pound, the crowd is gonna go crazy.
yeah,
I'll definitely want to see that.
exactly. And each of Volk's punches is gonna hit harder because of that. So
Yeah, exactly. Gonna be boosted by
exactly.
the crowd. So that's another factor as well, too. Of
Yeah,
course.
we have to factor that in, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's our prediction for the UFC 325 main card, and we will see you guys on the reaction next week.
Exactly. That's everything from us. So thank you guys a lot for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.
Catch you guys next time. Goodbye.